Steelers Nation, let me hear you make some noise. Now we're talking. So for those of you that don't know, I'm retired linebacker of the Pittsburgh Steelers, Arthur Moats, and I will be your host for tonight's interview. Yes, indeed.
Go Arthur.
And now, the guy that I'll be interviewing tonight is truly a Steelers legend, both on and off the field. Now, this guy came into the NFL in the 1987 NFL Draft when the Pittsburgh Steelers selected him in the 10th round, 261st overall selection out of Idaho State University. Now, once he got into the NFL, he enjoyed an 8-year career, 7 of them right here with your Pittsburgh Steelers, and his final year with them Bears. And during that time frame, he just went on to play in 114 career games, rushing for 3,139 yards with 21 rushing touchdowns, had 254 receptions for 2,133 receiving yards, and don't forget about them 13 receiving touchdowns either, okay? But more importantly, he is a Steelers legend and the former ESPN television football analyst. Make some noise for your Steelers legend, Merril Hoge.
I need to bring Arthur with me everywhere. That's a heck of an introduction. My gosh.
Come on, man. I mean, when I'm talking to you, you're a guy that is truly legendary. So let's start at the beginning of this thing. 1987 NFL Draft. What is going through your mind? Do you have any idea that it is going to be the Pittsburgh Steelers selecting you?
Actually, no. I actually thought of all the teams that were going to draft me, I knew Pittsburgh would never draft me. And here's why. I went to the Combine, and after the Combine, what players do is they go back to their college, and then certain teams will select to come work you out again just to look at you again and get a feel for who you are and have a one-on-one with you. And the Steelers actually did come work me out, but so did the Green Bay Packers, Washington Redskins, Raiders, and the Denver Broncos. And every one of them, all those teams that came, everybody worked me out again. Everybody redid my 40, they did the shuttle, they did everything. When I went to see the Steelers, and what happens, let me back up a little bit. What happens is the team will call in the night before and they say, we're going to be there at like 2 o'clock. That's where we're going to meet. So I knew the Steelers were going to meet me at a certain time. Right after you meet them, you usually go do your workout. So I got there. The guy who was the scout at the time, he was in a room. He said he's back there. I went back to meet him and see where we wanted to work out, and he was watching tape. And I went in and introduced myself, and I said, would you like me to go get ready to work out? And he's like, no, I don't need you to work out. He goes, I got everything right here. He was watching tape. He goes, hey, do you play basketball? And actually, I thought it was a trick question. I was like, well, yeah, actually, I was better at basketball than football, really, when I was actually in junior high. I go, I like basketball better. He goes, well, we got a basketball team. You can play on the basketball team there in Pittsburgh. You can make some money in the off season. And so he gets done talking about that, and I said, would you like me to go get ready to work out? And he's like, no, we don't need to work out. He goes, I'm fine. He goes, it's nice to meet you. So when I walked out, I was like, okay, of all, they talked to me more about basketball than they talked to me about football. I'm like, there's one team I know is not going to draft me, and that will be the Pittsburgh Steelers. And then ironically, they're the team that called me on round 10. And actually, it was that scout that I'm telling you about who made the call to me. So
let's go.
And then, I had to throw this out there. The Steelers were my favorite team as a kid. So, I mean, I had all Steelers, black and gold. So I was so disappointed that I had made such a bad impact on them that they cared more about my basketball career than my football career. But it obviously worked out, and I got to go to my favorite team.
No, without a doubt, it definitely did work out. And when you came here, you got a chance to join not just any team, 4-time Super Bowl champions at the time, and the legendary Coach Chuck Noll. What was that experience like for you transitioning to this team at that particular part, and more importantly, your dynamic with the Hall of Famer, Coach Noll?
Well, I will tell you this. I think this whole group here is well aware of the Steeler history. So this is my first day. I walked into Three Rivers, which was probably right over here in the parking lot, those who remember where Three Rivers was. And we practiced in Three Rivers. Our locker room was in Three Rivers. Our office meetings were in Three Rivers. So everything was in Three Rivers. But this is my first day. I walk in the door, and there's the 4 Super Bowl trophies. I walk by the Super Bowl trophies. You make a right. You go past Chuck Noll's office. You make the left. There's a water fountain. Then you make the long trek down, and then make the right into the locker room. So when you walk in the locker room, I've never been in the locker room before, but they have your name plate up on where your locker is. That's how you find where you're going to be. So I walk in, the first person standing there is Joe Green. So, and this, I can't even make this up because I'm not smart enough to, but he's standing there holding a Coke can. Okay, so I'm like, this is not happening, right? He introduced himself to me, as he did, he didn't need no introduction. He said, welcome to the team. And he said, your locker's right over there. So I walk over and I sat down in my locker, and I'm there about 2 minutes, and Donnie Shell walks in and sits next to me. So he lockered next to me. About 4 minutes later, Tony Parisi, the equipment manager, came over to me, and he said, do you know whose locker this is? And so I actually turned around and looked up because I thought maybe I had sat in the wrong locker. But I saw my name up there, so I said, my locker. And he's like, no, this used to be Franco Harris's locker.
Okay.
That's how my first day in Pittsburgh started. And then I go to practice, and the first person that I stand in the huddle next to is Mike Webster, who ends up being my roommate. And then John Stallworth steps into the huddle, and that was my first practice. And then, since you asked about Chuck Noll, the first experience I ever had with Chuck Noll is he liked to come into the weight room when we were working out. There was one particular exercise he wanted to see every player do, and that was, it was a standing squat, military squat, where you hold the bar over you and then you squat. You don't put it on your shoulders, you hold it over your head. And they had me matched up with a guy named Tim Johnson, who was drafted that year from Penn State, who was, I love that. She's showing up, brother, I love it. And he starts first, so they had 135 pounds, which may not seem like much, but you gotta hold it over your head and then you gotta squat. And it's one of the hardest exercises I've ever attempted to do. Well, right after he got done, they asked, I was next. Well, Tim Johnson's like 6'5", like 285. I'm like 6'1", 220. I'm like, I go, we can't take any weight off? And Chuck Noll's like, no, you ain't taking any weight off. And then he goes, and I know you're not on steroids because I saw your picture at the combine. Like, I'm taking body blow after body blow from Chuck Noll. But in all fairness, I share that because that was Chuck's way of finding out what your makeup was, like what you were made of. He did those things for a reason. He was trying to find out what kind of player do I really have here, and how can I trust that player, or can I trust that player? It was my first experience with it, because I was like, this guy's lost his mind, man. I can't, that's a defensive end. I mean, I'm a running back. I can't do what that guy, he didn't want me to do that. He just wanted me to attempt it. But it was a fabulous first week in Pittsburgh when I first got here that I will never forget.
Let's go, let's go. Now, most people in their careers barely get a chance to play for one Hall of Fame coach. But you got a chance to play for 2 guys. Chuck Noll for the first 5 years of your career, and then your final 2 seasons in Pittsburgh, you got Bill Cowher on the front end. Talk about what that was like when he took over, and ultimately your relationship with him as well during that time.
Well, I will tell you this: when Chuck left, that was a blow to this entire city. That change, I think everybody who remembered that moment could reflect back on that and go, we are so screwed. I mean, even players, we were like, man, I would never want to be the guy who's got to come in here next, because there is nobody, but this is our scope of our mind, that can trump what we just dealt with for 5 years, who really had trained us to play in this league and had led us and taught us so many things, not just as football players, but as life lessons. So when we heard it was Bill Cowher, all of us were like, well, who's Bill Cowher? Like, nobody knew who Bill Cowher was. But here's what Bill Cowher did. The very first thing I think Bill did was one of the best things he ever did. Well, there's two things he did initially. If you look at his first coaching staff, it might be one of the most coveted coaching staffs at that time than anybody. I mean, we had Dick LeBeau, Dom Capers, Marvin Lewis, Ron Earhart, who was the offensive coordinator for the Giants when they won the Super Bowl and beat the Buffalo Bills. Dick Hoke, who had been here and who is a legend for the Steelers, one of the greatest position coaches ever. So his staff was incredible. And then he met with every player individually before our first team meeting. And what he did was he outlined, first of all, he got to learn about you. You got to ask questions about him, and he got to establish what his beliefs were. So then we have the team meeting. He said something on that day that actually captured all of us and resonated with us. He's like, my job is to come in here and get you ready all week long. I'm gonna take care of you all week long. And then you will take care of me on Sunday. Now, a lot of coaches say that, and very few do it. So we start preparing. And Bill Cowher did exactly what he said he was going to do. It taught me one thing about leadership. And then it's not, well, he did, the other thing he did on top of that is he modeled what he said. And if you ever do any research on leadership, one of the most powerful things in leadership is really not what you say. It's what they see you do. And the way he modeled himself got our attention. It's what made us believe in him. And he would fight for every player as long as that player was fighting for him. And he was probably, I think the greatest compliment I could get any coach is that I went out every Sunday and I got more out of myself because I wanted to play for him and I didn't want to let him down. It's the same with Chuck Noll. They just did it differently. And he'd go to fight, he'd go to war for me, he'd go to battle for me. When I ended up going to Chicago, he went into Mr. Rooney to fight for the contract that I wanted versus the contract they were trying to give me. Now, he got kicked out of the office, and Mr. Rooney told me, don't you ever come in here again and tell me how to spend my money, which is actually kind of a funny thing that he talks about in his book, but he'd fight for you. And we wanted to play for him, and we loved playing for him. And I don't think there could have been a more perfect person to make the transition from Chuck Noll to the next head coach. I don't think there's another guy that could have done what he did at that time.
No, I love that. And like you said, man, smooth transition from him. And then obviously Coach Tomlin has been holding it down since then, man. So we definitely like that. But I do want to ask, man, when you finally transitioned from your playing days, you obviously went to ESPN. During that time, you were there for over 20 years as one of the main football analysts. I grew up watching you. Talk about what that experience was like for yourself, though, working there and transitioning from the NFL to that.
Well, I actually give Chuck Noll a lot of the credit. Chuck Noll, those of you who remember Chuck Noll, he would say it a lot. It was in the media a lot. The media talked about it a lot. Chuck Noll always talked about your life's work. You'd always hear your life's work. Your life's work's not football. He goes, you're going to do something a lot longer than playing football. So he would always talk about your life's work. He would talk about it in two settings. He always talked about it at the end of the season because he wanted you to go back and finish your education or work on something else that you were going to do after you got done playing football, but be productive. He also would mention it like we got beat by Cleveland in Pittsburgh, 50-0 one day. He said, we're going to be doing our life's work a lot sooner than we might think if we don't change shit. So he would talk about it then. So, but his challenge and wisdom about your life's work, when I first heard it, I was a rookie. I'm 21 years old, and I'm like, what's he talking about? I'm playing this long. I'm staying here forever. I don't know what he's talking about. And then I played one Sunday game, and I was like, oh, I think I know what he's talking about. Like, you don't play this game for 30 years. You can't play it for 30 years, especially as a running back. You're not playing it for 30 years. So he got my attention that you should work on your life's work in the off season. Now, I'm just making a long story really short. DVE sparked my broadcasting career. They asked me to come and do I was doing it. Did anybody remember B94? We got some B94? Okay, so a few people know B94s. I actually was the first player ever to do a call-in show, a radio show, ever. And I did it with B94. Well, DVE heard about it. They started listening, so they asked me if I wanted to do it on their station. But they had one stipulation. I couldn't do it over the phone. I had to go to the studio. And I had to do it at 7 o'clock in the morning on Monday after a Sunday game. Now, now I can do it from my tree stand. But back then, I had to drive. I lived in the South Hills, so I'll go back to another piece of counsel that Chuck Noll gave you about your life's work. He's like, you're going to have a platform and a stage that nobody else gets. Use that platform. Don't abuse that platform. If somebody offers you to help you, you do your part in the process. And I never forgot that. And so DVE was offering me an opportunity, and here I am going, I'm worried about sleeping a little longer. I know how I feel on Mondays. I don't feel like going to the studio, but I'm like, well, but do your part. So I agreed to it. Well, I had never been in a studio. I didn't even know what a studio looked like. So it's the first time I walk into the studio at DVE that I capture my life's work. I was like, oh my gosh, I love this. So if I had never taken the opportunity and taken them up on their offer, I probably never would have went into broadcasting because I never would have experienced what it was like to go in the studio. Once I did that, I knew what my life's work was going to be, so I started to work on that in the off season, and that helped the transition once my career ended.
I like that, absolutely. Now, when we play in this game, man, we always hear the different challenges of it, right? Some people talk about the studying, some people talk about just the dedication, waking up every day. What would you say, though, during your career, was the most challenging aspect of playing in the National Football League?
Well, I still think it's the greatest challenge, and it's the thing that separates a lot of players and really the good ones to the great ones. It starts in this one category. I think it's the most important aspect. I don't care what your position is that you got to be a smart player. You know, the National Football League, I'll give you an example. There was one year, Alabama they had a dominant team like they usually have, but this team was so good, everybody's like, oh, they could beat. At this time, the Lions had only won one game, or maybe they lost the entire season. And they're like, Alabama could beat Detroit. I said, there is no way Alabama has a shot to beat the Detroit Lions if they play NFL rules, because there's a variety of things that change in our league. First of all, the college field and the NFL field are completely different. Most people don't even know that. The hash marks in college are really wide, and therefore how you call plays, how you go about attacking an offense, completely different than the NFL because the hash marks are narrow. My guy is as good as your guy in the National Football League. In college, most of the time, in Alabama, my guys are better than your guys every Saturday. Schematically, this league right here, scheme-wise and IQ-wise, is the highest, most top-shelf game you'll ever play. So I go back to that Alabama game, they're like, their defense was an NFL defense. So I watched all 11 games leading up to their bowl game. In an entire season, they never blitzed as much and as many different times as the best blitzing team in the National Football League did on one Sunday. On one Sunday. That means every down tonight, there's going to be a different look of in college, you get a few looks and that's it. In the NFL, they change it every down and there's schemes things. So the biggest challenge was the IQ of this game, the schematics and understanding of how smart the players are you're playing, how great the schemes are, and that you have to adjust to that. I tell people all the time, if you're just a phenomenal athlete and you can't get your IQ to the level it needs to be, your talent is cut in half. The only way you'll ever maximize your talent is that if you can play with the IQ that is required in this league. And that was probably the greatest challenge that I dealt with, especially my first year.
Without a doubt. Talking with Merril Hoge right now. Got a couple of more questions. Then we'll give you a chance to get a question or two in for Merril himself. But if we just talked about the most challenging aspect of playing in the NFL, what would you say was the most fulfilling aspect of playing?
Jeez. Well, I will tell you this. Because I was a Pittsburgh fan, when I grew up as a kid. Now I have to paint the picture when I was a kid. Like in 1977, when you grew up, not everybody had televisions in 1977. And if you did, it was a box about yay big, you had an antenna, 2 knobs, 3 channels, no remote. So you had to select the right channel before you got comfortable on the couch. And we had a rule in our home, you couldn't watch the television on Sunday. So I didn't even know I didn't know football existed on television until I was about 8 years old. And then the only time I got to watch it was usually on Monday night, or when the Super Bowl would come, and Monday night. Once I started finding out that we had television, it isn't like today where it's just everywhere. So, as a kid, not having those, or having that experience, to me is still one of the things that actually helped me get to the National Football League, then to be drafted by the Steelers still is one of the most incredible things that have ever happened to me.
I like it. Well, the final one that I have for you, baby, is this. We always talk about when you come into the NFL, you finally realize I'm no longer in college. I've officially crossed over. I'm in the NFL. We call it the welcome to the NFL moment. If you could, talk about your welcome to the NFL moment.
Well, actually, there's probably 2 welcome to the NFL moments. It was a week into training camp, and Chuck Noll cut a player in the middle of practice. They escorted him off the field. He went up to the building where everybody checked in to come to the team or leave the team, and then he got in a white van and he disappeared in the white van, and I never saw him again.
All right.
I knew right then, man, you better be buttoned up all the time. They didn't cut you after games, they're cutting you in practice. So that was a welcome. It isn't like you got a scholarship and you're just going to get benched, but you're still on the team. Like, you are gone. But probably, so that was the reality of welcome to the NFL. And then probably the one that still got, when I had my football card. When I got a football card, I was like, oh my gosh. I mean, I've been seeing football cards just as a kid forever, and now I have one. And that was probably like,
let's go.
Wow, I made it.
You did make it. And trust me, man, we all are glad that you came here as well. So, once again, before we open up the Q&A, give another round of applause for Merril Hoge.
Well, thank you guys, man.
And now we will open it up for some Q&A. So if you have a question for Merril, come up, say your name, and then you can ask your question. Yep.
Hi, Merril. Dan, always enjoy you. The '89 season, I think, is the one that was real surprising when you went to the playoffs, right?
Yes.
What is a team that you were on besides that one that surprised you the most, that you played on, and a team that you covered that surprised you the most?
Well, that's a good question. In 1989, the one thing I want to highlight about 1989 that most people don't even remember, that was Chuck Noll got Coach of the Year. And that's the only time he ever got Coach of the Year. I know, like, when we heard that, we were like, so 1989 will be special to me for a bunch of reasons, but it was the only time he ever got, like, Coach of the Year. I would say probably when Bill Cowher's first year. We went in. Well, this tells you a lot about preseason. We were 0-4. I don't even think we scored a touchdown. Like, we were, even players were like, man, I really don't know what to expect, but we're not very good. We go to Houston. Speaking of Bill Cowher, Bill Cowher tells us before the game, at some point, if it's close, we're going to call a fake punt. Going to what a lot of coaches have that, yeah, we're going to do it, but then we never do it. We're on the 50-yard line. It was like we didn't get the first down, and they called the fake punt. They snapped it to Warren Williams. Warren Williams ran it down to about the 1-yard line. We punched it in, and then we went on the tear. Like, we had the best record either in the NFL. I know we had the best record in the AFC because we had home field advantage until we lost that. But we'll stop it there because a lot of things happened that actually in Bill's career, from a coaching perspective, he learned from that he actually changed. He actually changed as a coach. He grew as a coach. But that year was special. And then any team that I've covered in the National Football League, well, I don't know why it pops into my head. Maybe because they're here tonight. You know, the Patriots team, I can't remember what year it was, but I know it was around 90s. It was late 90s. It may have been their first Super Bowl, actually. No, I think they'd already won a Super Bowl. Let's put it this way. I think it was week 3. They play a Monday night football game, and Kansas City kills them. Oh, no, yeah, this is later in Tom Brady's career because everybody's saying he was over. He was done. He was finished. I think they're 1-3, or they're 0-2, but their record is really bad. And it might be 1-2 because Cincinnati's going to New England to play, and they're 3-0. And everybody's got them. I mean, when you watch them on tape, you're like, well, this is Cincinnati's. It ain't even close. That's where we get on to Cincinnati. So this year, that's where this comes from. Well, the New England Patriots come out. They morph themselves into a 2 tight end, I formation, run the football. Everybody calls it play action. There's play action, there's run action, and there's RPO action. There's actually 3 phases in it. When people do run action, nobody ever says it. They just call it play action. But run action is when the offensive line comes off the ball as if they're running the football, kind of like an RPO. But in an RPO, I can throw it or run it. In a run action, I ain't throwing it. I mean, in a run action, that's all I'm doing is throwing it. I'm not going to hand it off to you. We're selling run, then I'm throwing it. And then they just threw it to Gronk. They just they'd sell run, they'd throw the ball. They did that for about 4 weeks straight, went on a tear, and ended up winning the Super Bowl. And how that team transformed itself was just an interesting watch because for 3 weeks they looked as bad as any team in football has ever looked. Tom Brady looked like he was done. He was shaking in the pocket. He was flinching in the pocket. He was a complete mess. And they changed it in 1 week and kept that model and just kept growing out of it until they won a Super Bowl.
Please.
All right, another question. Oh.
Your opinions on the running back market in these days?
The running backs?
Market.
The running back market. Your opinion on the running back market these days?
Oh, the running back market. Well, let's put it this way. Okay, running backs are making $7-8 million. Okay, maybe 10, 11. Who would take that right now? 1-year deal, $10 million. I'd take it. You know what's unfortunate is that here's perspective. Okay, it's a brutal position. This is a business too. Okay, what business owner is going to go out there and you can't fault it. You can't invest in something that might not be there for you. So you can't get too heavily invested in that position because of that. You got to be really smart when you do it. But if you're playing, if there's somebody that is special, okay, let's take Bijan Robinson, who went up to Atlanta. Now that kid's special. If he keeps evolving when he gets to his year 4, you won't see them give him the minimum. They'll keep him around, but they'll make it so that he's in his 4th year and he probably has 4 more. And then after that, it's going to decline quickly. And so I don't completely feel, I understand the business side of it. I understand how you can't handicap yourself and then you can't pay other players that are significant or more significant than you might be based on your 10th year at the running back position, and you've already declined it. And no running back that ever starts this way redirects and goes this way. Especially when you get around year 8, year 9. So financially, it makes sense. But when they are playing, they're still making 10, 11, $12 million. I mean, that's not like chump change. Everybody acts like they're poor, poor me. I think, perspective.
Absolutely, absolutely. We got time for one final question for Merril. One final question. You got one? All right, then. Well, with that being the case, that will conclude the interview. Let me hear you make some noise one more time, and let's see our guys take care of business tonight. Thank you again.
Thank you, guys.